Hey, let's talk a little bit about your great success with Robin Hood in New York City, where you were combating poverty. And of course, you know, and I know that a person's race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and many other factors are more likely to create difficulties in economic achievements. It's the issue of equitability. And you said that policy reform is crucial in terms of addressing that. Would you care to make any comments about how we can really get effective policy reform in this country? Because you and I can do all we can do, and you're doing dramatically great things. But if we had policy reform, it would make it better and easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would absolutely make it better. I mean, I look at, I look at the issue of child poverty as just one example. And when people say that poverty is a choice, my answer when I think back to them, when I say back to them, I said, you're right, it is a choice. But it's not the choice of the individual who the weight of poverty sits upon their shoulders. Poverty is a societal choice. It's how much pain we're willing to tolerate in our neighbors. And when people say, well, give an example of that, I say, well, look at the child tax credit adjustment that was just recently passed that we worked on for close to a year. And this was basically making a basic adjustment of making the child tax credit fully refundable, because the way the policy was laid out before is that we had a child tax credit, which is a poverty fighting measure that was put into place in the 1990s. And it said we're going to give a credit to a family who's living in poverty for every child that they have. The problem is with the way it was currently constructed, with the way it was constructed, with an earn-in that it had, there were about 27 million children every single year who were being left out of this. So a poverty fighting measure that was leaving 27 million children out because they were too deep into poverty, which makes absolutely no sense. And so we have been pushing and advocating for a basic adjustment on the child tax credit to make it fully refundable, so that it'll actually cover down on the children that we seek to support. And the reality is that with that basic adjustment that was done, that child poverty in this country was almost cut by half with the stroke of a pen. That's what I mean by the choice of poverty. And so when I think about what it means to actually add a policy lens, we have to make sure that we have lawmakers that are actually thinking about this stuff creatively, with a sense of not just curiosity, but with a sense of urgency. But then it goes back to us. It's what is our role in that? Policymakers will generally vote the way we ask them to, right? They're our representatives. When they go sit in the House of Representatives or the Senate or the State House, or in your city council, or in your mayor's office, these are people who are there to reflect the will of the people. And when they run on their platforms, they run on platforms that they believe is what the people want to see happen. And if it's not happening, they then have the opportunity to be taken out of their jobs. And so I think it's up to us collectively to make our leaders better. It reminds me of a great story of Lyndon Johnson and Dr. King, where Dr. King was sitting in the Oval Office with Lyndon Johnson, and they were talking about what eventually would turn into the Civil Rights Act of 65, and he's telling him all this stuff that all these things here needs to be incorporated and so on and so forth. And then Lyndon Johnson looks at Dr. King and he says, "Now go out there and make me do it." Right? Now go out there and make me do it. Basically telling Dr. King, you want this done, rile folks up, get folks excited about it, go get the votes. Because if you do that, I guarantee you'll get the policy you're looking for. And so the beautiful thing about policy making in many ways is I think about the work that we did at Robin Hood, where we built a policy wing for the first time in the history of the organization. Where I was very clear on the fact that I don't know how you can claim to fight poverty if you're not understanding that the origins of poverty oftentimes are the policies that we have in place. We have policies that are putting people and keeping people in poverty. But I also know that my responsibility as the CEO of the organization is to basically go out there and make them do it. And that's where the pressure that we have to put in place, that's where that pressure sits.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll share with you that one of the things that I've been very outspoken about that I think is a huge problem, it may be the biggest problem, at least in my view, that will perpetuate poverty and inequity in our country is that in the public school system today, two-thirds of the third graders cannot read. Two-thirds cannot read. And educators tell you the obvious, which is up to about the third or fourth grade you learn how to read, and after that you read to learn. And so, it's so sad because we have so many millions of young people that are doomed to not have an equitable opportunity in the future, and that's a policy issue. That is a policy issue. In fact, right now in North Carolina, we just passed a law which will require that the schools teach on the science of reading, which is what a lot of schools are not doing these days. So you're right, policy really, really drives huge amounts of issues. And all these issues are tied together. And I want to just segue from that to, talking, which I think we should, a bit about racial inequity and social injustice. And specifically, I think our audience would like to hear your views about, the deaths of George Floyd and Freddie Gray, and Derek Chauvin was recently found guilty in the death of George Floyd. And your latest book is 5 Days, and it's all about your hometown. And you, right there, people that were very involved in this. What's your view about the verdict and what it means?
Yeah. I there are moments in our history where you won't forget where you were when you heard certain pieces of news. And I think about it in context where one of those moments was I'll never forget where I was when I got word of that Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all three counts. Um, when I wrote this book, 5 Days, it was really about the 5 days that surrounded the death of Freddie Gray and his funeral, which he was buried in the morning, and I went to his funeral, and by the evening, uh, our city was in a state of emergency, and the National Guard was called in because what were peaceful protests for weeks were no longer peaceful. And I remember when I first wrote the book and put it out there, it was all right around the death of Mr. George Floyd, and people said to me, they're like, "Well, it's amazing how timely your book is," because that was about something that happened at that point 6 years ago when Freddie Gray was killed in police custody. And I said, the horrific thing is, name a time when it wouldn't have been timely. Because whether we're talking about Mr. George Floyd, or whether we're talking about Michael Brown, or whether we're talking about Philando Castile, or whether we're talking about Freddie Gray, or whether we're talking about Anthony Anderson, or whether we're talking about Chris Brown, or whether we're talking about Tyrone West, or whether we're talking about Sean Bell, or whether we're talking about Eric Gardner, or whether we're talking about Sandra Bland, or whether we're talking about Breonna Taylor, or Tamir Rice, or Trayvon Martin. It's like and. It's like, but we're watching something that continues to show itself in just really horrific ways in our communities and our societies. And I think about it in two respects. One is we cannot ignore that we're still dealing with a fundamental malignant issue within our society that's existed from our origins, and you mentioned it. It's this issue of race. It's the fact that we are still, if you look at the 12 times in our nation's history when the president has called out the National Guard, when the president of the United States has ordered the National Guard being called out for an issue, 10 of them had to do with race. Only two, only twice. The New York riots in New York for the postal workers strike, and then once after a hurricane in St. Croix. And looting that took place in St. Croix has the President of the United States called out the National Guard. And there were only for those two incidences that did not have to do with race. This is something that this nation has to wrestle with. It's something this nation has to understand, that race is still the leading predictor of life outcomes that we have within our society, whether you're talking about educational attainment, whether you're talking about wealth, whether you're talking about job growth and mental health, whether you're talking about maternal mortality. It's literally across the board. And so our country's ability and our country's maturity to be able to deal with these various issues has got to be crucial, because we watch that it's not just about, what happened with Mr. George Floyd. It's about the fact that race is still such a huge, massive issue that sits over the way we all have to exist and live our lives. And I think the second piece is understanding the holistic nature of what we're talking about. If you look at the case of Freddie Gray, what I wanted to highlight in 5 days is that, that the police department, did they fail Freddie Gray? Absolutely. This is a 25-year-old young man who his crime was he made eye contact with police and ran. And that was enough to justify probable cause. And he was arrested for that. And an hour after he was arrested, he had 3 broken vertebrae and a crushed voice box. And there's no explanation for how that happens. So did the police department fail him? Absolutely. But the reality is the police department was not the only department, or not the only system to fail Freddie Gray. It was just the last. If you look at the first 25 years of his life, which were, born underweight and premature, born into deep poverty, born exposed to heroin because his mother battled addiction for much of her life. By the time he was 2 years old, he was already lead poisoned because of the home that he was living in. Like, there is a holistic nature in the way we must attack these challenges and attack these issues that either, putting it exclusively on one agency or putting it on one department or on one group is not just unfair, it's intellectually dishonest. And so that's the holistic nature of the conversation that includes race, that we must have within our society about how we can address some of these issues that still result from the fact that this country's history, and that this is all things that have been built upon the fact that we still have a nation that was built and founded on a racial hierarchy, and we have not wrestled with that.
Yeah, and it's really a fundamental leadership problem. I've said of late, after reading many leadership books, that there are really 3 characteristics of outstanding leaders. One is they're very honest about reality. The second is they're very clear about where they want to go. And the third is they have the vision, the courage to go there. And so part of our challenge in this country is we just got to be honest about reality, as you described. The vision's clear. It was laid out in the Declaration of Independence. We just got to be honest about the reality and recognize that our reality is not allowing for the vision to become a reality. So before time runs out, because this segues so nicely into talking about how circumstances and our environment really impacts us. And our audience should know that there's another Wes Moore, and you wrote a book about it. And but it's a sad story about how the environment, because you and he grew up in very similar situation in Baltimore, and he's in a life sentence imprisonment, and you have done great things and will continue to do great things. Can you talk about why you wrote the book and what you think the central meaning of the book is for our audience?
Yes. So, I wrote this book, and it was about these 2 kids that around the same time I was getting a Rhodes Scholarship. That the Baltimore Sun, which the hometown paper, was also writing a whole series of articles about 4 guys who robbed a jewelry store and in the process ended up murdering an off-duty police officer. And when that murder happened, that tragic murder happened, I found out that one of the people that the police were looking for, that was eventually captured and tried and convicted and sentenced, was a guy whose name was also Wes Moore. And the more I learned about him, the more I learned how much more we had in common than just our names, that we were, living in the same city. And, we both grew up in single parent households. We both had academic and disciplinary troubles. And, I just kind of realized more and more that what we had here were 2 young men with similar circumstances who were both battling and existing in a hostile world. And that what were those things that really helped to cause this split amongst them? And you just said a really important word. And it was something that I didn't think about until I really asked Wes about it, where, Wes is now in year 20 of his life sentence. And I remember, I think it was in year 3 when I went to go see him, or year 4 when I went to go see him. And I asked him, I said, so do you think that we're products of our environments? Because we're talking about Baltimore and just the environments we came up in. And I told him I'd heard that so many times over and over when I was growing up that I never questioned it. People are products of their environments. And he took a pause and he looked at me and he said, actually, I think we're products of our expectations. And as soon as he said that, I thought to myself, he's absolutely right. We're not products of our environments. We're products of our expectations. And someone once said to me and said, it's a real shame that you lived up to your expectations and Wes didn't. And I said, actually, the real shame is we both did. We both ended up exactly where we thought we would at some point. And it's important to remember with all of that the expectations that people have for themselves, they don't come from nowhere, right? The expectations that people have from themselves come from the expectations that other people have of them. And they just internalize them and they make them their own. And so whether we're talking about the expectations that we have for that school student that you pointed out, who's in class and hoping that that class and that teacher and that institution is going to be as invested in their future as they should be invested in their own, whether it's the expectations that we have for that mom who is working multiple jobs and just trying to get back home in time, that maybe she can cook something up for the family. Maybe she can have another opportunity that maybe next year that job will get a little bit easier or give hours. It's going to be a little bit more forgiving. Expectations for that person who's being recently released from prison and can't seem to find a place that's willing to give them a shot. Expectations for the person who has an idea and a thought and something that they think could be an interesting business that could employ people, but they're just having difficulty finding the capital to do it. How do we alter the expectations that we have for our society to actually build up mechanisms where our society has a chance to build and grow and succeed? Because in many ways, our nation becomes this nation of self-fulfilling prophecies. We just have to think really hard about what kind of expectations do we have for ourselves and what kind of expectations do we have for others.
That's such a powerful insight, Wes. In 1956, Earl Nightingale, who was one of the first founding fathers of positive thinking, did a radio talk show. And in that, he said, I'm going to tell you the strangest secret in the world. And in that broadcast, he said, the strangest secret in the world is we become what we think about. That broadcast has reverberated around the world for decades. We become what we think about. That's exactly what you just described. And we do think about ourselves relative to the environment we're in. It creates our expectations. And you're right. How do we change those expectations? How do we change the way we think? How can we have gotten the other Wes Moore to think the way you think? That's a challenge for all of us as we go forward. But I think a lot of it is policy, and a lot of it is getting back to the fundamental vision and the purpose of this country. But ultimately, we have to change the way people think, don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. And it's changing the way that we think about other people as well, right? It's changing what is it that we hope for? What is it that we see? That when we're looking at a community, when we're looking at a school, when we're looking at our kids, what is it that we see? Because I think that if we looked at that group of students and we saw that one of them is going to be a Nobel Peace Prize winner, if we saw that young person over there, that's going to be the person that's actually going to end cancer. If we looked at that person over there and we said that person is going to build a business that is going to employ thousands of people. And if we looked at that person over there and we said, that person, that young person over there, she is going to be the president of the United States. If we looked at all those people and we thought that, we would act and respond differently as a large society about how I would address that group, how I would think about that group, about the resources I would want to surround around that group. And so part of it is for all of us, we have to ask ourselves that question, is that when we look at our communities and we look at our families and we look at our children, What is it that we see? Because if we see high expectations for them, it'll change our language, it'll change our behavior, and it will change our investment in what we're actually hoping to get out of them.
That is so powerful. And as we wrap up, Wes, it seems to me that throughout your life and certainly what I have personally experienced, fundamentally, it's about education. It's about teaching people, the skills, but more importantly, teaching them what they're capable of and how to have a growth mindset and how to believe that they can change and they can improve. Um, and you've been very involved in that at Bridge Edu. What final thoughts would you say to people about education and how important it is in terms of providing that real pursuit of happiness in our country?
I would say education is the greatest skeleton key that we have within our society because it is something that can literally open up every door. The choice then just simply becomes yours. It's about the fact that it changes your psychology. It's about the fact that it changes your networks. It's about the fact that it changes your mindset. It's about the fact that it reminds you that there is no room that you walk into ever again that you don't belong in that room. That's what education gave me. It didn't just give me the exposure to some people who have been the most important friends and mentors of my life. But what it also gave me was the fact that it reminded me that there was never going to be any accidents of my birth. Not being black, not being, living living on the cusp of poverty, not being, fatherless, not being from the Bronx or living in Baltimore or whatever, that was ever going to define me or that was ever going to limit me. And so in essence, what education did was it taught me what it meant to be free. And that's the goal I think we have for all people. We have to teach freedom. A freedom to dream and know that your dreams won't be laughed at. That your hopes will actually be supported. And education, what it gives you the psychological change to know that that's not just real, but it's what you should demand. And so that's the thing that I hope we can get from this large educational process as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. One final question, and I'm sure I know the answer, but I just want the audience to hear it. You spent your whole life, and I suspect you'll spend the rest of your life in service to others. And I've told people as often as I can that one of the most important ways you can bring happiness to yourself is to help others. Has your life's work brought you happiness?
Oh, it's brought me utopia. I got to tell you, I think about how lucky I am. I'm extraordinarily blessed. I'm blessed with the life that I've been able to live. I'm blessed by the fact that I've been able to see things that my family didn't even know were real. I'm blessed by the fact that I can hopefully be a manifestation of something that a lot of people who came before me fought for and hoped for. I'm blessed by the fact that I get to wake up every morning and the first thing on my mind is what are we going to do to make life a little bit easier on other people? I am a very blessed human being. And I feel like so much of those blessings, they're not just manifested in the fact that we and I take service so deeply. It's manifested in the fact that it's what service gave to me. I tell people, if you're not going to do this to be selfless, then do it to be selfish. I love my journey. I love my days. And when people say, wow, it's great that you do good work all day and that type of thing, I'm not just doing it to be selfless. I'm doing it to be selfish. Because I cannot tell you how much I get out of it. I can't tell you how much I get out of it when we have a chance to actually open up an opportunity for a student that wasn't there yesterday. I can't tell you how much I get out of it when we have a chance to, see somebody who, a simple thing like getting sick would have been actually catastrophic for them, and to know that that's not going to be the case anymore. I mean, I can't tell you how happy I get when we talk about increasing transportation assets and getting people from where they live to where they work. Like that's exciting to me. And it's not just exciting to me because of altruism. It makes my life worth living. And that's the thing that I think just gives me such extraordinary joy in all of this, is the fact that every day is a reminder of how blessed I am, because we still have a society that's far too easy to leave people behind in an incredibly inhumane way. And that is not just unfortunate, but frankly, to your point of going back to our original origin documents, it's un-American, and we should be doing better than that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, a wise person said a long time ago that we should do unto others as we would like for them to do unto us. And that might be a good lesson for us all.
Amen.
So, look, when you go to see the Other Wes the next time, tell him the chairman and CEO of Truist said hello, and I'm pulling for him.
Let me
Please
tell
do
you,
that.
I sure will, and you have no idea how much that means to me that you just said that. You have no idea how much that means. I will, and I have to tell you how meaningful it is that you asked for him. So bless you for that, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And for our audience, I just want to say, I hope you, and I know you have found this discussion with Wes as inspirational as it is for me. Thank you, Wes, for dedicating your life to making the world better. And I'll look forward to learning more about you and what you do in the future. Maybe one day we'll be able to do one of these in person when the pandemic is over. But in the meantime, I want to make our viewers aware that in the back of one of Wes's books that we've referred to, The Work, there's a list of organizations throughout the country that would love to have you reach out. Get involved with the work. Make a difference by serving others. Follow this Wes's example, and then let's try to help the other Wes's follow in the same path. May God continue to bless you, Wes, your family, and all of the viewers' families and these great United States of America. Have a great day.